Bob, I appreciate you holding over for a little talk about the Iranian war. This morning, before I came over here to where I was recording and was telling my wife goodbye, there was a live broadcast with Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, and General Kane, and I got to watch part of that where they were updating us on the war, what's going on. And were you able to catch any of that?
Yeah, I watched a bit of both of them, and apparently Pete has just come back from visiting some of our warriors over in the Gulf, and he had great things to say about them.
Um, so there's a lot of talk. And you yourself, being a lieutenant colonel with the Airborne Army Rangers, you know what it's going to take for these men to go in and either take an island or uh, take control of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, you know, it's our live bodied assets. And we also know that our enemy uh, doesn't necessarily play by the rules. And so the last number I heard was 17,000 troops. What can you discern there? What is truth and what's fiction?
Yeah, that is difficult to discern. Um, yeah, I say up front that the military's done a phenomenal job. They're focused tactically on destroying the navy of the Iranians, their missile systems, decimating their nuclear programs, although they still have somewhere hidden, those nearly 1,000 pounds of enriched uranium at
Yeah.
60%, decapitating the regime. Uh, what I've argued, though, is that if you understand the Twelver Shiite
Yes.
uh, faith group, that they are they're doomers. They don't mind destroying their nation in order to preserve what they believe is going to usher in their Mahdi, their Messiah. Some of those people actually believe in this, and so they will fight to the last person. And of course, they'll extract as much using uh, the mechanisms of asymmetric warfare that remain to them. That's not a dig on our military. Our military is doing a phenomenal job.
Right.
I would argue though that our strategy of you know on again, off again, what's the end state here? Should we not have perhaps left earlier in this campaign, or is there an end state that we find that uh, leaving the current regime, albeit decimated, in charge, doesn't really fulfill the promise that President Trump made up front, and that is to allow the Iranian people to prosper in a brighter future. And I think if you leave them in the same regime as these dead enders, these twelvers, that you're not accomplishing that. Now, uh, our interests, of course, are keeping a nuclear weapon out of their hands.
Right.
That may require us to go in physically into some mountain deep down, extract those containers of enriched uranium, of which there are many of those, and then, of course, extricate them out of there and destroy any infrastructure that may remain underground. That's a pretty dicey mission, but one that evidently may be contemplated. Uh, I know that there's been a lot of talk about Karg Island, where 90% of their oil is, you know, taken from pipes and put it into uh, containers, tankers, and then sent out through the Strait of Hormuz. Um, that's, of course, most of the military facilities have been bombed, but no doubt the facilities around there are heavily booby trapped now. And if we were to go in there, that would be a dicey operation as well. Now we can control it from the air, we can control it from the sea. There are all sorts of options that Central Command is looking at to try to satisfy what President Trump has been articulating. Um, once again, I have a piece coming out tomorrow, I think, in Fox News that says, celebrates the military effectiveness, but questions still, what's the end state?
Right.
Uh, where are we going to be at the end of this campaign, geopolitically? Where are the Iranians going to be? Yeah, I would have liked to have had some idea up front. It's not just we don't want the mullahs of Tehran to have nuclear weapons. I don't think anybody ever wanted that. But we have spent an incredible portion of our arsenal, which I think is dangerously close to not being able to replenish in a timely manner. And then, of course, we've locked ourselves in to uh, being in the Middle East with a large footprint, much longer than anybody wants to be. And when you think about our true adversary is the Chinese, then being tied down in the Middle East serves Beijing's interests, arguably serves Russia's interests because we can't help the Ukrainians, and that war seems to have no end. And so there are a host of issues here that we have to come to grips with.
I, for 47 years, they've pretty much run amok. They've been one of the largest sponsors of terrorists. They've killed a lot of our soldiers, made a lot of attacks, and our former presidents had not gone after them. And I trust President Trump to a point that he wants to be tough and take care of this regime. But have we now gotten into a point of no return? And as you stated, they're 12ers. I mean, they're waiting for their Mahdi to show up, and some of them believe they can have him show up by just causing great chaos. If they waited for our troops to take that island and they just blew themselves and us up with them, that would be part of their strategy because they believe that that's going to bring in their Messiah. And so how do you win something like that?
Yeah, well, we were locked in Afghanistan for over 20 years and had the wrong mission. Nation building in a nation that is stuck in the seventh century is
Mm.
not a very good strategy. Much the same in Iraq, and I've been there a couple times, and we had the wrong strategy going in. Of course, it was based upon the idea that they had weapons of mass destruction, which at one point they had, but certainly not when we went in and we knew it. But we fool ourselves otherwise.
Right.
The Iranians are ideologues. Um, it's a very capable country when you consider the diversity there, the 90 million people, the riches, and so forth. But for 47 years, as you point out, Chris, they've been controlled by uh, Islamists who are focused on world domination, on pushing their agenda across the region. And unfortunately, I don't think that they're not believable and they're not going to bow out easily. Yes, we have destroyed their navy. We destroyed much of their missiles, but they still are able to get some. And if we go in on the ground, albeit just to uh, keep the Strait of Hormuz open, just to control their oil at you know, you know, will likely accomplish some things, but it's not going to give what the president originally promised, and that is freedom to the Iranian people. And I
Right.
think that they took that to the bank, and that's just not going to happen easily. And we don't have the manpower over there to go in and take over that country. 90 million. Think of the hundreds of thousands that we sent into Iraq, and Iraq
Right.
is much smaller, uh, certainly in population as well as landscape as Iran. Iran is a tough place, and so I don't think we're going to do that, and I don't think we can fulfill what the crown prince wanted, and that is to take over and have an election. That's just not going to happen. That's a pipe dream. Um, I think our interests were like it was articulated initially. You know, deny them a nuclear program, and keep the oil flowing, keep them from harassing us through Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. And of course, those the Hamas is gone for the most part, but the Houthis are firing up things in the Red Sea, and the
Right.
Hezbollah is creating problems for Israel and southern Lebanon. Uh, so they're not totally out of the question. And I think they'll continue for some good long time as long as they have the resources. Now, of course, the problem that President Trump has is politically, the war is losing its momentum here in the United States,
Yeah.
and the closer we get to the fall election, the less there'll be an inclination to support the war, and as a result, that will also impact the economy because the oil prices are high. And oil prices translates to everything in the economy. So my concern would have been long ago, define your strategy, make it clear to everyone. And as soon as you accomplish that, get out. You don't. And at this point, I'm not sure that it's all that well defined. I'm somewhat critical of the administration because we're here we're looking at some sort of ground incursion in which at the very beginning on day one we were promised no boots on the ground. Well, I'm sorry, but 82nd Airborne and two Marine Expeditionary Units are boots. Um, are they? What is it they're going to do? Probably what I articulated moments ago, but um, extracting ourselves, and repositioning our resources in the Pacific where I think they're, more needed for our own geopolitical reasons, is something that's going to be very difficult. And of course, that will have an impact on the fall elections. And
Mhm.
if the Republicans lose the Senate and the House, then Trump becomes a very unproductive president by virtue of no legislature that's going to back him. So
Right.
these are domestic as well as geopolitical issues.
You brought up the WMDs, back in Iraq, and I recall Mr. Netanyahu was here 2014, 2015, and and I'm exaggerating, but it made it sound like they were days away from a nuclear weapon, and that never happened. So once again, is Mr. Trump getting bad advisors, or because I honestly don't believe that he would intentionally deceive America. I don't see that in his uh, DNA. He's just been so honest with us in the past, and so I
Yeah, no,
just wonder if he's deceived.
I tend to agree with you. I don't think he would. I think his level of attention to some of the details may not be uh, communicated all that well. I listened to Joe Kent before he left the counterterrorism director position, and he argued that we didn't have you know information that suggested that they were anywhere close to a nuclear weapon. Well, what Witkoff says, Steve Witkoff, right after the end of February, right before the beginning of Epic Fury, Steve said that the Iranians in the negotiations bragged that they had you know close to 1,000 pounds of enriched uranium and they can make 11 bombs. He said that in a week ago in the cabinet meeting as well. Now, having 60% enriched uranium does not mean that you're going to have a weapon, but it does mean that you have the capability of further enrichment, and then likely you could make a weapon. So the argument was that they have the capability of making a nuclear weapon, and Iran with a nuclear weapon is not at all in the interest of the United States because it could threaten not only the Middle East, but Europe and eventually us if they have a ICBM. All of
Right.
those I take, I believe those are possible, but I don't believe that they were on the path to having one. Now, what Mr. Trump should have said, I think, early on is that, you know, they're on the pathway to have a nuclear weapon. We did not destroy them in June of 2025 as he promised because of new intelligence. So, what we want to do is to eradicate as much of their capability as possible, and then we'll reevaluate it every so often. Uh, the only way in which they were going to completely destroy any capability, any potential for a nuclear program would be to change the regime. And changing the regime isn't going to be done from air power. And you've got to put people on the ground,
Right.
and you have to facilitate a new government that is going to be compliant with what we have in mind, and that's just not going to happen. And so somehow we should have put together a strategy that made sense given the resources we were willing to commit. And we were not willing to commit like we did in 2002, 2003, multiple hundreds of thousands of troops and trillions of dollars in order to finish off the Iranian regime. And besides, we didn't have a good alternative ready to march in there and to take over from the Grand Ayatollah. Um, so there's so much that was not done. And I think it was a wish and a prayer, and it was kind of following the chaotic strategies of a Mao Zedong that what we have experienced over the last 4 weeks. It's just I like I say, I applaud the military, but the strategy just doesn't seem to make any sense.
They have got to have their own internal revolution where their people are willing to come out and fight. And I read something several weeks ago where they Kurds were going to be out there fighting in the streets. What happened to that?
Well, the Kurds are only going to work on Kurdistan, and Kurdistan are they're an ethnic group, and of course there are 30 something ethnic groups in Iran, but they're in the north. And what we have favored in the past is that the Kurds do have a country. It's part of Iraq, it's part of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. And that just like Armenians up to the north, if there were national boundaries for Kurdistan, that would make sense. Even in northern Iraq, you have the Kurds have a great deal of autonomy from the government in Baghdad. Um, and to a certain degree, they've enjoyed similar autonomy in northern Iran. But the Kurds were not about to march on Tehran. They were just going to consolidate what their ethnic minority rights and autonomy they enjoyed in northern Iran. And the Kurds in Iraq cooperate with the Kurds in Turkey as well as in Iran. So any information to suggest otherwise, I think, was not properly vetted.
Does our General Kane and President Trump are they fully aware of the mindset of Tehran as far as Islam goes and the Twelver doctrine? I mean, do you think somebody has fully explained that to them, or are they kind of looking at it from another lens or looking through another lens?
Well, I think they use a transactional way of looking at things. You kill enough, you destroy enough, and you're going to win the hearts and minds of the people. No, I don't think that that becomes a significant factor. And it's only when you get people that truly understand these countries in the briefing room. Now, I've been in, not in this particular case, but in prior administrations, I've been in briefings in which they really don't talk about these ideological, these religious uh, pieces of the puzzle. I can. John Abizaid was the CENTCOM commander in 2003, and John was a classmate of mine at West Point, and he was in Baghdad and in July of 2003, and the government, the U.S. government, decided at the recommendation of their forward political people to disband the Iraqi government. And John, there on the platform said, all that's going to do is lead to asymmetric warfare because the army will disband and pick up arms and fight against us because they lost their jobs, they lost their nation, and so forth. Um, John was Lebanese, uh, spoke Arabic, uh, understood the region. Unfortunately, too often, people in the Pentagon, where I spent a quarter of a century, uh, look at it from a geopolitical, uh, transactional point of view and don't consider these very weighty ideological issues when making recommendations. Um, that's just not done. And it's unfortunate. So, does General Kane? I don't know General Kane from anyone. I've just seen him on television. I know Pete, but that's been many years ago. Um, I don't know for sure whether these people even considered that. I have good reason to believe that they haven't and taken it seriously. But, it's what it is.
Well, so Bob, one last question, and I'm going to put you in the hot seat. If you were asked your opinion and Trump said, Bob, what do you think I ought to do? How would you caution him?
Well, you need to read what I wrote for Fox News coming out tomorrow. That's easy. Uh, I think we've diminished our arsenal more than we should. I think we're in a dangerous situation. I think that yeah, we need the Middle Eastern countries to pay for this war.
Yes,
And
yes.
I think Trump is moving in that direction. I don't favor trying to control uh, their oil distribution. I do favor, getting the allies to keep the Straits of Hormuz open, but I don't want to, get locked into, a stability operation in Iran with U.S. forces because, it's going to take a lot more than a brigade of 82nd Airborne and two MEUs in order to do that.
Yeah.
Uh, and I want a decent end game here um, to get us out of this and to be able to begin to transition to pivot to the east that Barack Obama promised decades ago, and Trump has basically said he wants to avoid war. Well, we're in the middle of one. We need to be very explicit. We've accomplished what we want. If if it means that we have to have in our possession there are 60% enriched uranium, and we can get it, we'll get it and get out of there. Don't get locked into a stability operation, a ground conflict, or an occupation force. Um, it's not in our best interest long term. Maybe eventually they'll build up again and create a scenario which requires a future generation to go in there and to disarm them again. I don't know. Um, but we need to prioritize our resources, and that's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a challenge for all of us. We can't do everything, and unfortunately, if we continue this much longer, and not only is the Republican Party going to lose the Congress, then everything that Mr. Trump has been able to accomplish, I think, will be swept under the rug by a far left administration that will eventually come in to replace him because they'll just cripple him with impeachment and all sorts of things. So we need to be realistic about what we're capable of doing. It's not a dig on our military. Our military is incredibly capable. It's about the policy, and we need to sort that out.
All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much. As always, it's some fascinating discussions on AI and the war, and your insights are just truly amazing. So I appreciate your time, and God bless you, sir.
Thanks, Chris. Have a great day.